Our next session examines Hispanic attitudes about careers in tech centimeter. Please welcome Omar Duque, President of HITEC, and Lili Valletta, CEO and co-founder, Cien Plus and Culturintel.
Hello again. It is so great to be back, and it's so great to welcome our friend Lili Valletta once again back to HITEC. I am just so excited about the work that we continue to do in partnership with Lili and her team. We have been doing this report now for the last couple of years, and it's really interesting because the very first time we ran this data was in the fall of 2019 and pre-COVID. And really what we wanted to do is we wanted to see what were those drivers and what were those perceived barriers that Hispanics in technology saw either as accelerating their career or as being a hurdle to their advancement up the corporate ladder. And when we first ran these numbers, it was incredibly fascinating to see what was driving our leaders within the Hispanic community. And then COVID hit, and we ran it again and saw a complete just 180 change in how people were thinking about their jobs and balancing everything that was happening in the world. And so we're really excited to come back once again and present our findings of our latest report, where we see kind of where we are, and we're able to see that arc of the way that people's attitudes towards their careers have changed over the last 2.5 years. And just so excited about this work. Our corporate partners receive access to this report as a benefit of being a partner of HITEC. If you're interested in getting access to this, please reach out to us, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. And Lili's going to talk a little bit about what's new this year and how now you can access this data and track it over time through the online portal that Lili and her team have created. So I'm going to really just toss it over to Lili and have her walk us through where we are and what we've done, not just in this report, but where we've come over the last 2.5 years. So Lili, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Omar. We love our partnership with HITEC. Shameless plug, because we're not only empowering our Hispanics in tech community, but this is being done in collaboration with that proud Hispanic-owned company. So I appreciate you so much, Omar. And thank you everyone for joining us again for what is going to feel a little bit like a deja vu. So I love that you already set the stage, because you may remember it feels like a century ago when we had a lot of these sessions. But yes, since 2019, which we've been monitoring this data, and that gives us the foresight that many didn't have. So kudos to HITEC, because this study started before COVID, and talk about having a baseline, right? So that we could see what's changing over time. Now, many of you know that more than ever, the need for talent, information, data, and insights is critical and is very hard to get with traditional methods. And, you know, we can have wishful thinking that people are going to be honest when you do a survey, but that's not always the case. So Omar, you know, we have now collectively, since we started working with HITEC, mined and analyzed well over 5 million digital discussions, digital voices, so that we can interpret what it reveals about careers in tech. But COVID happened and it changed everything, right? And I know, Omar, when you and I were prepping for today, we said, you know what, let's set the stage, right? So, and I'm actually gonna play backwards and ask you the question, why do you think it's important to set the stage for those of us that are watching us right now, so that we can kind of distill some of these macro trends?
I think it's, you know, we've come such a far way, right? And really what we wanted to do is we wanted to see in an unbiased way why what we needed to focus on as an organization, not just us at HITEC through our programming, but also how we can help our corporate partners think about talent better and think about what they can do to attract diverse talent, right? At the end of the day, we all know that right now it's a massive race for talent. And that's really how this started. And this partnership has enabled us to really keep our finger on the pulse of what Hispanics in technology, but now also what Hispanics in general think about potentially careers in technology, and how companies can be better at attracting and retaining and helping grow that talent. Because, you know, that's something that we see from every single one of our corporate partners, this need to attract, retain, and develop and advance diverse talent, and in this case in specific, Hispanic talent in technology. And we think this is such an amazing opportunity and tool to look at what these trends are, so that we can be really 2 steps ahead in working to really kind of work and support that talent pipeline.
That's right. So thank you, Omar. And I know a lot of people, when we put these numbers in front of them, may think, okay, are we reacting to the Great Resignation? Are we just responding to what's happening with diversity, equity, and inclusion being so hot? Well, think again, because there were things already happening BC before COVID that we've had the pulse on, to your point, Omar. So I wanted to just remind us, for everyone that is here, that there are different trends that are impacting us in the context of talent and workforce. So because it's important for us to realize that this is not just reacting to COVID or to the Great Resignation, I want to remind everyone of just 3 very basic macro trends to keep as a backdrop for the information that we're going to share, right? So the first one, and we've known this even before COVID, there was already talks about the future of work. But what's happening is the future of work in many cases is manifesting and coming to life now. And also the World Economic Forum has been talking about this great reset. But all of that, while we are still in this moment debating, is it remote? Is it hybrid? Are we back yet? Are we? Will we ever be? So work has been reimagined. So that's a trend number 1. Number 2, and we all know it, there's been a power shift, power back into the employees and the talent, calling it quits, literally. We've heard about the Great Resignation. You see kind of like a technical definition, plenty of articles about it. I won't even read them. There are so many. You can all search them out on your own. But clearly there's a shift. But here's the funny thing with this shift, because we humans are interesting creatures. Now we're seeing boomerang employees and this whole trend of the rise of the comeback. And we're seeing it in 2022. Now, keep in mind, the Great Resignation is still a thing, but we're seeing this counter, move happening as well, where the sources, like the LinkedIn most latest data that they put out, said that about 4.5% of all new hires that we're seeing based on 2021 numbers had been already at the company. So you're seeing the comeback. So this is important because, in the words of Inc., maybe we are now finally ready for a great onboarding, not the Great Resignation, but it's the opportunity for leaders like you who are watching to rethink what is this new approach to the Great Reset and the future of work now, and what does that mean for Hispanics? Now, why Hispanics? And you may be thinking, well, here's Omar, Lili, and everyone here saying that we're important. Let's take the emotion out of it, because there are shifting demographics that are critical. Shifting demographics that are confirmed by the US Census data and even the Department of Labor, who continue to say over and over again that we're not only driving 50% of all American population growth, but we're representing 78% of net new workers when we look at between 2020 and 2030, kind of like this decade that we're in. So if we are driving all growth, 78%, by the way, while the non-Hispanic cohort is just growing at a 0.5% growth rate. So this is a number of gains, and I love talking to the HITEC audience because they are highly technical, data-driven, and engineers, many, and the numbers just make sense, right? But they don't make sense when we look at the workforce mix, because depending on the report you look at, whether it is just engineering or science or just, workforce in tech, over and over again, it's clear, like this chart shows in particular, that there is at least a 3x, a 3 times talent gap when I compare the share that Hispanics represent in the workforce of our careers, let's say in science and engineering, versus the share that we represent of population. So there is something happening there that is a talent gap, obviously. And when you don't fill a gap, there are economic implications. So it's talent economics, what we're talking about here. So for those of us here that proudly carry our Hispanic identity, our Latino influence, wherever you go, well, it's time, clearly, with all those trends, to graduate from this being maybe an altruistic or emotional effort because we got to hit our diversity targets, to recognizing that there is no pipeline without inclusivity. I'm going to pause for a second. Omar, how does this sound? How does this feel? There is no pipeline without inclusivity.
Right.
Dime.
There is no pipeline without inclusivity. We've been saying this, and I think the numbers today finally bear that out. And I think companies, not just technology companies, but companies across the board have seen that. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we've seen this become such an imperative over the last several years. And as we think about out and into the future, into the next 10 and 20 years, we see how and why we need to really double down, right? And this becomes a much broader conversation about how we intervene even at the educational level earlier on, middle school and earlier, to drive more youth, more diverse youth, more Hispanic youth into careers in STEM and intervene earlier to get more of our students on the path to being able to develop the tools and the expertise that they need to be the STEM workers of the future. And we see this. We did a report last year that we released at Latitude that talked about what will the future of America look like if we don't make significant investments in the Hispanic community today. Specific to your point, right? We are driving this, we are driving the population growth, yet our investments aren't necessarily matching up with what our needs are going to be in the next 10 and 20 years, which makes this work that much more critical, not just for HITEC and for our community, but really for the global competitiveness of our country, of our economy, over the next several generations. And that's why this is so critical.
I love that. And that is the perfect setup. Everybody, please feel free to borrow this phrase. There is no pipeline without inclusivity. Just as you heard from Omar, there is no global competitiveness, sustainable global competitiveness, because the numbers just don't work any other way. Now, talking about numbers, that is why we are kind of obsessed with this notion of cultural intelligence. Those of you that know me and the work that we do with our company, you've heard me talk about this a lot. Cultural intelligence is not a program, it's a mindset, and any leader that wants to lead and future-proof themselves need to be aware of, understand, and apply cultural competence and have the inclusive insights so that you're making everyday business decisions with inclusivity. So that said, this is like the great reveal. You are gonna get today a sneak peek into some of the findings, because there's a lot more that you can search and find in the full report. As Omar mentioned, this is made available to all of our HITEC partners. If you want access, please feel free to reach out to your HITEC friends and representatives. But what we have done, yet again, is put a pin on careers in tech, the sentiment towards it by Hispanics versus the overall, so that we can get some perspective. And in case you're wondering, gee, what does this study answer? This is actually a snapshot and a screenshot from that portal that Omar mentioned. We have evaluated different dimensions of insights. How do we feel towards careers in tech, all the way down to what's preventing Hispanics to enter. So those that are in, what are they saying and why they may be disillusioned or not about their career, and how do we capture the new incoming people that are maybe interested, right? So lots to distill, but I'm gonna give you the cliff notes. And Omar, if anything is a big aha for you as we're going through this, feel free to stop me.
Yeah, and actually, Lili, if I can just point out one of the things that we added this year that I'm really excited about. So last year in 2021, we launched with the help and partnership of Accenture, a focused work around intersectionality, specific to the LGBTQ plus community, but also looking at how as a Hispanic community, as Latinos, we are by nature diverse, right? In so many different ways. We are not a homogenous group. And so, we spent some time last year having conversations about what it means to be a Black Latino, an Afro-Latino, or an Asian Latino, and specifically also the LGBTQ plus community. And so this year, particularly, we drilled down a little bit further on those sentiments from leaders in the LGBT community. And so really excited about that additional lens that we added this year.
That's right. And again, please feel proud as proud members of HITEC and this great community that this is clearly not just breakthrough, but arguably one of the most vast and biggest analysis of digital voices to specifically understand insights in the tech industry. So it's so funny, right? We're using tech to help tech. That's exactly why we're here. Now, for those of you talking about the tech that may be wondering, gee, how does this work? So we do have a proprietary methodology. I won't go into the whole tool stack and how it works, but at a glance, and this is a technology audience, so this should be super easy to explain, is 3 steps, Omar. We always get asked, how does Culturintel do what it does? It basically goes out into the universe of digital comments everywhere, and we harvest and scrape all of those, respecting anonymity and privacy, of course. And those voices of those conversations of people talking about their careers in tech become our pool of unstructured data. Then our tool stack, which has well over 7 tools or so, are working together so we can cluster and look at the patterns in the body of those comments. Not chasing a keyword, but looking at a Boolean search type of analysis where we see what are the topics, the tonality, and how does that look like or sound like across different segments. We segment based on how people self-identify. And then last but not least, we report, which you're gonna see some of those highlights today. And this methodology has been widely published. During COVID, we've been really busy. I'm actually gonna be even teaching a class at Harvard coming up, using those data points as ways to inform organizational design. So this is how we do it. All right, but let's dive into it. Here is where the data was coming from in our last run of information and insights for this study. We took all of the comments that we could find that were contextually about people describing their experience about their careers in tech. This was between September of 2020 and September 2021, so a full 12 rolling months. What's really interesting about this pie chart, well, first of all, the universe is over 2 million digital discussions as our end values. But the sources, unlike what most people think, because they may say, gee, is this social listening and just grabbing what people are saying on social networks? Not really. As you can see, 63% of all of these discussions that we found and mined contextually are coming from topical sites and message boards. So people like the anonymity of places like Reddit, where you can really go deep into asking each other questions about their places of work or their experiences, etc. So this is important because we want to dispel the myth that this is only coming from a handful of sites. Inside this pie chart is thousands of destinations. Anywhere we found a digital discussion about careers in tech. Are we good so far, Omar? Should we keep on going?
Let's keep going.
All right. Well, here's where it gets really exciting because a lot of times companies and people say, well, it's so hard to understand those insights by ethnicity or gender or generation. Well, guess what? We did find in this last run almost 200,000 Hispanic digital voices of professionals in tech who were voluntarily and unsolicited sharing their experiences. Here's what's really interesting. when compared to when we did this study in 2019, pre-COVID, that engagement of discussions or the volume has increased 1.7 times, which suggests an increased interest in the engagement, or maybe trying to look for a digital sounding board for somebody who's out there just open to share or looking for answers. Now, as you mentioned, Omar, this time around, we also double-clicked into Hispanic LGBTQ+, and we did find a meaningful universe of 13,000 data points where people self-identified many times in the comment itself, and also Hispanic VPs and directors, so that we can have a senior layer and a lens that gives us that unique perspective, and the findings were amazing. Now, here's some of the things that we learned. Again, warning, warning, these are just some highlights or the snapshot of a lot of the information that is available on the portal and the full study. But this is one of my favorites because it's just like the quick eye chart of what has changed when we look at what we call the centimeter. How are Hispanics feeling? These are Hispanics in tech. How do they feel towards their career? And look at this, interestingly enough, it was quite high in 2019 when we first did this read. It went down, and a lot of it had to do with the company's, ability to respond to the crisis and maybe invite people to be part of community efforts. And this was the time, like in the heat of COVID, when there was this, rebirth of corporate social responsibility, and people kind of came together. How do we do this? And flexibility came into play and all kinds of things. So yes, there was a spike of the positive, and you would assume, gosh, that's great. How do we keep that going? And it actually went down, Omar. Look at the last 12 months, that last read. We are back up, creeping up into the negative sentiment amongst our Hispanic professionals in tech. But there's an interesting dynamic too with the neutral, kind of staying the same as of 2020, but it's a very big chunk of neutral, people without really an opinion. They're going online to ask questions. Maybe they are looking for others like themselves, looking for networks, looking for connections, or maybe just asking about, hey, does anyone know if there are opportunities in, Chicago? So it's quite interesting because that suggests that there is a hunger for information, for answering questions, and maybe seeking out people like themselves to just bounce ideas off of each other. So that is what we're seeing on the quick read of what has shifted. But I have more, because we not only did the snapshot overall for Hispanics, and this is where I feel this particular HITEC study is uniquely positioned to equip you with insights that nobody else has. Let me say that again. Nobody else has this information in this level of granularity, where you can see the sentiment profile by segment. Overall Hispanics in tech, also those in the VP and director layer, the Hispanic LGBTQ+ perspective, which we never really had. And how does that compare versus the overall population of professionals in tech, or the overall population of VPs and directors? So I know this is a big of an eye chart, but you can very quickly see the outliers, right? Our LGBTQ+ Hispanics in tech are the most negative of all those cohorts that we see plotted here. And that is quite concerning. And the study has the double clicking into the why, okay? Now, here's where it's interesting. Those little circles that you see to the right, that is where you see how that negativity towards careers in tech is different versus their overall counterparts. So for overall Hispanics, as well as those senior leaders, it is much more negative than their counterparts. And yes, unfortunately, when we look at the shifts or evolution versus the last time we ran the data, that positivity has shrunk. So lots to grab here, but I always say that a sentiment chart is very superficial because I need to know the why, and we do have the why coming up soon. But any comments or any quick reactions to this, Omar, as you see it?
No, I think this is great. And as I think of, how we structure our work and our programming and our outreach efforts to target different segments not just us as HITEC, but our corporate partners. This, I think, is really insightful on how companies should be thinking about these different segments to dispel some of these maybe potential misconceptions, but also to maybe think about how they can continue to work on their own internal culture and communications to create a more welcoming and inclusive environment for more Hispanics in their workforce.
That's exactly right. And why is it that all of a sudden that neutrality is going up so much? Our interpretation of that insight and the types of comments there, Omar, suggests that our community that is engaging digitally to talk about their careers in tech are looking for networks like HITEC. They're actually looking for questions to be answered that maybe their own employees or employers are not answering. So they're just going online where they hopefully find people like them. It's fascinating because that is a new trend. It wasn't that high, certainly 2 years ago when we did the first run. Now, the question people always ask when they see that chart is like, well, why? Right? And that's the beauty with the Culturintel Tech and how we do what we do for insights, because we look at the context and the volume of those patterns of the context of why people are feeling negative towards their job gives us these buckets. So we didn't come up with these buckets. When we analyzed those 2 million data points that you saw on the first pie chart, the clustering step revealed organically these mega themes. And it's quite interesting because there are some that live on the personal barrier side, like something that you described that impacts you directly, like the workload, my compensation, my job security. But there are also other barriers that we have qualified as structural or maybe environmental barriers, like the company's values or the bias in the industry. And for each of these, I'm not going to read them now, but what you see here as those quotes are sampled verbatims that come straight from the voices of the people that we analyzed in this study. So this is fascinating because it already gives us a short list of the types of barriers that may get in the way of a good experience in your career in tech. Now, for all those segments that I just shared, we do have the ranking of these different barriers, and I do have a quick chart coming up soon, but I'm highlighting that because, as we said earlier, the full study is published on the portal, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to give you the quick Hispanic snapshot. Now, if this is the Hispanic sentiment profile at the top, it's the same chart that you saw earlier. What are the top drivers and barriers? And here's what's fascinating. Again, we're looking at the last 12 months of analysis, and we see that a top driver, so when people love their experience and their career in tech, Hispanics put compensation at the very top of their satisfaction drivers, followed by the fact that the company is inclusive, progressive, and has good values, and that they feel like they're receiving opportunity. Now, what is really interesting is that little arrow you see to the right of those top drivers is how has that factor changed since 2019? So all of a sudden, compensation, my gosh, that's a big jump. And we know the economic distress, maybe changes in the household. Many of us are multi-generational households, and we help not just our inner circle of a family. Our family is much broader than that. No wonder compensation as a driver is 3.4 times higher amongst Hispanics than it was for us in 2019, followed by an evaluation of the company's inclusivity and values and how it shows up in society. Now let's look at the right-hand side, top barriers. What's getting in the way? What's annoying me about my career in tech? Well, number one is personal growth limitations. And imagine how that probably feels in the world of remote hybrid work when I no longer can just walk the hallways and make connections. The second thing, or the second barrier, is insular or bias, right? So, of course, feeling like I'm misjudged or judged differently because of who I am, and the overall company values is quite interesting. because the values of a company can be as much of a driver as we saw on the left-hand side, but also as much of a derailer as the top three, barrier to careers in tech. So some interesting changes here. And of course, there are some implications, because if we know compensation is important, so we probably need to focus on that. But there's other things here, like if there are personal growth limitations, how can we activate networks that really promote more connectivity between others and peer-to-peer or growth plans, right, that are more intentional? How do we communicate and share the company's values in the context of onboarding, so that the welcoming environment that you're willing to put forward not only is related to the job, but maybe has a bigger pitch, because company values and your inclusive approach to society matters. And of course, we have to keep fueling a conversation on compensation that is competitive. And now that we know this ranks so high for our community in the wake of the last 2 years of analysis and COVID and many other things, then it becomes that much more important that our people are not just at market levels, but really being competitive. And sometimes it's not just money. Compensation is the full package, right? What other benefits, what stipends are available. There's companies that are including childcare, benefits that have a monetary value. I mean, there's some of us, we even did it at our company where we have a tech stipend because everyone has to set up their own mini TV studio at home. So think about it beyond just the paycheck. It's a comp package story that definitely sticks and is attracting our community.
And Lili,
any reactions?
I would venture to say that that this has changed even more since this data was taken through September of 2021.
Oh yeah.
Given what we're seeing currently with inflation and cost of living continuing to rise, I would venture to say that if we took this data today, this number would even increase even more, right? And as you talk about the full package, as we return to work, what does that look, right? Am I getting extra compensation now for the time that I'm now once again spending in traffic to go in the office and this back and forth? I think companies need to factor that in to their return to work, and they are, right? Factoring that into the return to work strategy.
Absolutely. And as you remember from the other chart of the segments, there is more than just one cut of the insights that we've done with the HITEC study. Now, this slide is one of my favorites because it confirms once again that it's not a one size fits all when it comes to understanding the barriers that we have to overcome. And by the way, barriers are an indicator for places of intervention. So even if you don't pay attention to specifically where each dot and little face here plots in the diagram, clearly it's different for Hispanic versus the VPs and directors versus LGBTQ. And when compared to their counterparts, it's not the same. So let me just call out one data point. For example, Hispanic VPs and directors, you can see them really high up in this column that is a structural barrier of insular bias or this exclusivity that sometimes within companies silently there may be cliques, and are you in or are you not, and are you even able to penetrate the clique? And in this case, Hispanic VPs are calling out that cliquey-ish exclusive mentality as a barrier to their satisfaction in their careers in tech. However, for their counterparts, the highest point is actually not that, but the fact that they're calling out that they may feel misaligned with the company's values. A very different dynamic and type of intervention for each, right? You can see LGBTQ as well, quite interesting, on how a top barrier to them has to do with those values. So when I'm engaging either with a network or an association of LGBTQ plus professionals, or when you are deliberately onboarding a talent that identifies with that group and community, how much emphasis are we putting on explaining our company values and how well do they really align to those priorities of that particular talent and community. So anyway, I just highlighted a few things, but this is fascinating. I love it. It's one of my favorite charts, and we have even more detail underneath it in the study where you can see if I want to do an intervention and reshift and fill those gaps, where do I get started and what is most important? So here you have it, a quick snapshot of barriers by segment that no one else has, but only the HITEC study. Now, just as we went into understanding the voices of Hispanics in tech already, well, if we want to really nurture the pipeline, we need to understand what is getting in the way for those that want to enter this industry, but maybe don't seem to be able to get in. So here's what we found. Very similarly to the other analysis on barriers, we also looked at what are those barriers that these organic conversations that we mined revealed about what's getting in the way of me getting into tech. There were psychological and personal things, like maybe I'm doubting my capability. Am I ready? Do I have the right qualifications? I have anxiety and fear towards the interview process, all the way to the left to systemic and environmental things like there's hiring bias, it's an unwelcoming workplace, or just having access to the job interview to begin with, just given a shot to show up. Now, this is what we found. And I, again, love these kinds of charts where we get perspective. So you can see here the top 7 barriers to entry for the overall population that says they want to go into tech. And hey, I want to get the interview. Give me a shot to show up, and gee, but maybe you do have the opportunity, but they're doubting themselves. I'm just going to call out those 2. Now, how is that different for Hispanics? This is fascinating, Omar. It's completely different. The factors stack up in a different order. And the top thing, as you see right there at the very number 1, is the hiring bias. And this is how people organically are saying it, right? I'm being misjudged. I don't think they think I'm as smart as the other candidates. And that second one is fascinating because it's kind of like an uncertainty or lack of mentoring perspective, meaning they don't have anyone to kind of get intel from before even going into the interview or looking at opportunities. And the number 3 barrier is a welcoming workplace. So they haven't even made it in and are already judging, oh, that's not a good place because they just don't seem very friendly.
And I think this is fascinating, Lili, because as I think of our companies, our partners, right? This is such valuable information for our partners because this is a perception, right? Mm-hmm. I might come in perceiving that there's a hiring bias and I'm already putting myself at a disadvantage going into that because maybe I'm not presenting my best self because I already have this idea that there's a hiring bias. And so how do companies fight this perception? How, maybe different hiring panels and making sure that the people who are doing those interviews are maybe diverse leaders. Exactly. To maybe eliminate that perception that there is an implicit hiring bias. And many of our companies already do that. But I think if we really want to address what is the larger, more systemic challenge of not having enough Hispanics in these roles, this is really valuable information for companies to rethink how they recruit, how they interview, and how they hire. So this is fascinating.
Exactly. And you know what? This may sound strange, especially to the HITEC audience, because I know you do a ton of amazing personal development work, and we want to continue that. So please don't take my observation as suggesting otherwise. However, this fills me with pride and joy. Look at how low of a barrier. This is a self-described by Hispanics, how low it is, the fact that we may feel not so qualified or fearful of the interview. We are fierce and persevere. And I think it's that, kind of immigrant American dream mindset that makes us so uniquely hardworking. And this is data already suggests that, right? The work ethic, give me the opportunity and I'll show you what I can do kind of attitude. That's showing here. So it's not about, oh, let's help Hispanics feel better about themselves. because they're afraid to show up. No, it's the other way around. It's like, I'm unafraid to show up. Just give me a shot to show up and show you how good I can be for you and your company. That to me is so exciting, Omar, and it speaks volumes of our mindset, our Hispanic, Latino, resilient mindset. That is not so much about self-doubt, it's more about the systemic and environmental things that are perceived as getting in the way. So
absolutely.
Cool.
I love that. I love that.
So cool. And I know that we're almost running out of time, but we have a bonus track. I didn't even think we were going to have it ready for this meeting, but let me tell you, the HITEC Summit is the first set of eyes and audience that is seeing this, because you saw earlier, there's a boomerang effect with the employees. That means people seem to be regretting that they quit and they're coming back. Well, why are people regretting quitting their jobs? And we did this analysis at a broader level, so not just for a given segment, but looking at men versus women, because there's all kinds of hypotheses about why women left and are they really going to come back. Childcare and at-home schooling and all kinds of other things have been the typical things called out. Well, guess what? We found 5 different regrets. It's so fascinating. Some people to the far right miss their high-paying jobs, and a lot of people are missing just being with people and community, right? Or the fact that no opportunities were really found at this new company. So the grass seemed greener, but then they went to another job and are like, maybe I had it really good and I didn't appreciate it. Fantastic what we were able to find. Lots of verbatims to back it up. And here's the highlights. And we're almost landing this plane now, right? All right, so a lot of people were wondering, well, if people are regretting quitting their jobs, why is it that they are regretting it? Well, here we have the read, and I'm so excited because you are the first to be seeing this information. The top regrets, you see them on the left-hand side. The proverbial grass wasn't as green as expected. Maybe you thought this new culture or a new company was going to be better. And all of a sudden, we're seeing that the new culture doesn't align is a top barrier or a regret. They miss people. So we are social creatures, and a lot of people are feeling like, hey, I really had a good community back there, missing their high-paying job, and maybe there's not as many opportunities in this new company. So that's making some people regret why they quit. But here's the cool part, and I love this. We get to see how that's uniquely different for men versus women. So let's focus on the big bubbles. Men are articulating the fact that, gee, I went into this new company, but the new culture is not really aligning as much. However, look at how big the fact that men are missing their high-paying job is playing as a factor of regret. Now, that compared to women that have that little teeny bubble of 7%. So when women say, I am regretting that I quit my job, is not because they miss how much they got paid. It's because they miss that big old bubble of the 41% of missing people and community, followed by, you know what, this new culture doesn't really align. And then you see the other factors. But it's fascinating how that high-paying job as a factor plays completely different for men. And also, it is so much bigger, the factor of people and community for women than it is for men. So again, I'm not playing to any stereotypes, but what we're seeing here is what the organic voice of the people have revealed when they're talking about their regrets in quitting their jobs. This is fascinating, such a fun new analysis, and I'm so happy to be sharing it with the HITEC community today. And with all of that, I know that, Omar, you mentioned it, there is a portal, and it's accessible to HITEC partners. You can go in, this is like a screenshot of it, where you can find all this information. And there is even the opportunity for companies to have their own, so that you're not just seeing the overall careers in tech numbers, but the centimeter by segment and drivers and barriers for your specific company. So imagine the power of that. So you can benchmark yourself versus the industry or even competitors. So that is really breakthrough and a new delivery. of the information this time around, and we're so grateful for HITEC's investment and opportunity to do this together. So you all have access to that. And I just want to close with
Lili.
the fact that, yes, sir.
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to close with the fact that as we have seen all of this, right? We know we are, working in publicly traded companies. We have shareholder and value responsibilities, and there is cultural return on inclusion. And by the way, this inclusion is not just for the sake of checking the box of our HR dashboard, but there is return on innovation, and that innovation that comes with the fact that we need to stay ahead of those shifts in the market, given the resignation, given everything that we talked about at the beginning. So please graduate from chasing diversity for representation's sake. We know we need an inclusive approach to talent. Harvard has said it 1,000 times. It doesn't even matter how colorful your workforce is, that's diversity. Because if you don't have a culture of sharing and inclusivity, then it just stays as representation. And that won't unlock the power of the people, which is ultimately what we want. And here's just homework for you all. I'm not going to read it. I found one of my favorite articles about building an inclusive technology, and it ties into the workforce as well, so that you can all noodle on this. I'm sure you'll have access to this deck. If not, take a snapshot of this one, but it's homework for you all. I think any leader in technology should definitely read this article, which I found amazing. And my final invitation to us all. I know the tech industry is obsessed, rightfully so, on applying personalization in the way users are understood so that we can develop better products and deliver a better experience. I mean, all of you know that. That's the basics of technology today, right? However, I wonder how much we have applied that same mindset to the world of talent and our biggest asset in a company, right? So how about we graduate from applying that personalization to tech to applying better personalization and people understanding for better talent in tech? So those same methodologies of design thinking, of empathy first, everything we do to develop great product and great experiences should also be applied to the way we develop great workplace experiences that retain and develop, and of course, keep attracting a vibrant workforce that, as the math suggests, won't be full without Hispanics being part of that formula. So hopefully everyone learned something new, and please reach out to your HITEC colleagues and representatives to have access if you don't have access to the site. And thank you so much, Omar, once again, for this great partnership. Gracias.
Thank you, Lili, once again for this work. It is absolutely fascinating. We're so thrilled to be able to continue this partnership. We're so happy to, be able to provide this information and this data to our HITEC corporate partners, our HITEC community. If you haven't yet accessed, and there's my timer, if you haven't yet accessed the portal and the information, and you want to learn how you can do that, please feel free to reach out to our team. If you want to learn more about how you can get a company-specific breakout of this data, reach out to us. We're happy to work with you and show you how we can make that possible. But really, I think that there's so much here. There's so much that we continue to learn. It isn't static. It isn't homogenous, our community. And we need to continue to invest. Like we said earlier, there is no pipeline without inclusivity. And we as an organization are committed to this work. Lili, thank you for your leadership. You are always welcome at HITEC. We look forward to welcoming you back. We look forward to potentially welcoming you back when we go back in person in July. So once again, thank you so much. Adios.
Gracias, everyone. Bye.